What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Cozy coming at you with another episode of the Beginner's Guide here on the channel. And today I want to propose a scenario. You have 8 cards and your opponent only has 4. So you're winning, right? Not necessarily. Because one of the biggest mistakes newer One Piece card game players make is looking at the number of cards in their hand and assuming that tells them who has the advantage. It doesn't. Your hand is only one of the resources available to you. And today, we're going to talk about card advantage, what it actually means, how you create it, how you accidentally give it away, and most importantly, how understanding it can completely change the way you play the game. So, in our last episode, we talked about tempo and how controlling the pace of the game can force your opponent to respond to what you are doing. Today, we're taking the next step because controlling the pace of the game is great, but what happens when you run yourself out of cards doing it? That brings us to card advantage. And before we get started, I want you to forget one idea. More cards in hand does not automatically mean you are winning. Card advantage is much more about that. At its simplest form, card advantage is about getting more value out of your cards than your opponent gets out of theirs. So you've probably heard TCG players using terms like +1, -1, 2 for 1, and we're really thinking about the exchange of resources here. So let's make an extremely simple example. I use one card to deal with one of your cards. That's basically an even exchange. 1 for 1. But let's say I use one card, and because of that card's effect, I'm able to remove 2 of your cards, like Gravity Blade. Now we've got a 2 for 1. I spent 1 resource, you lost 2. The exchange favored me. But One Piece makes this concept more interesting because cards aren't just sitting in your hand. They can become characters, they can become counters, they generate effects, and your life can eventually become cards as well, even through trigger effects, which means you need to look at this as an entire game state rather than just cards in hand. So, when we're looking at the One Piece card game, I want you to start thinking about 3 major resource pools we have. That is your hand, your board, and your life. Your hand contains potential resources. Your board contains resources you've already converted into threats or utility. And your life is both your protection from losing the game and potentially future cards that can enter your hand and used as additional resources or threats or utility. That's why simply counting cards in hand doesn't tell the whole story. Let's say I have those 8 cards in my hand, but only 1 character on board. My opponent has 4 cards in hand, but 4 characters on board. I technically have more cards in hand, but who's actually in a stronger position? And well, honestly, it depends. So those 4 characters represent 4 resources that they've already converted into board presence. They could potentially attack, they could have effects, they could force me to spend cards defending myself. So instead of asking who has more cards, start asking yourself, where are our resources? And this is a much better question to ask yourself to be a better One Piece card game player and just overall a better TCG player across the board. So, the first thing that we should probably start looking at is to stop protecting everything. Now, we need to talk about one of the biggest resource mistakes that I see new players make. You do not have to save every character you have. So, let's say your opponent attacks one of your characters. You really like that character. You've built a bond with them. You've built this into a Nuzlocke of TCGs. So you counter. And they attack it again. And you counter. And they attack it a 3rd time. You counter for a 3rd time. Great. Your character lived for the turn. You're down 3 cards from your hand that you could have used as potential resources or future counter to protect your life with on the following turn after this one. So what was that character actually worth? Were they actually worth those 3 cards? Probably not. Was it valuable for you to win the game with? Potentially, depending on what the board state is. But those are the questions you want to look at. And sometimes you just gotta let the character die. Seriously, if keeping a character alive costs you more resources than that character is going to generate, you're probably losing the exchange. This is where you have to stop thinking emotionally about your board and just not protect everything you just played. So ask, what does this character give me if it survives? And then, is that worth what I'm about to spend to save it? If the answer is no to either one of those questions, gotta let it go, man. Next, taking life actually can give you resources. Now, the same idea applies to your leader, but beginners will naturally think, I don't want to take damage. And obviously, because if you have no life cards and you get hit one more time, you lose. Makes sense. But think of the life cards in your life area in the One Piece card game, kind of like a health bar. And life is a resource. So let's say your opponent attacks you for 5,000. You could counter with a card in hand, or you could take the attack, or you could take the attack. Now, granted, you do lose one life, but that life card goes to your hand. And think about what just happened. Instead of spending a counter from your hand, you preserved that card and gained a card from your life, not changing your tempo, but increasing your potential and card advantage. So, in some cases, it means that taking a life can be a valuable resource decision where sometimes your life is more valuable protecting you, but sometimes that card is more valuable in your hand or being triggered out of life. So learning the difference is part of becoming a better player. Now, I want to explain the hidden cost of removal. Now, let's look at removal in general, because this is one of the easiest places to understand card advantage. So imagine your opponent spends their turn playing a large character. They spent the card, they committed the Dawn, maybe they used another card or effect to help establish it. Then you use one card to remove it that can be incredibly efficient in the exchange. But here's the important part. Not all removal is automatically good removal. If I spend two cards to and a huge amount of resources removing something that wasn't actually a threat to me, I might be the one who loses that exchange, right? And so whenever you're considering removal, you need to ask yourself, how much did my opponent invest into this threat? And how much am I investing to answer it? This is where card advantage and tempo start interacting with one another, because sometimes an exchange might be inefficient from a card advantage perspective, but absolutely is necessary when it comes to tempo. And in a lot of cases, tempo does outweigh resources just a little bit when it comes to what state of the game you're in, how far along you are, what is the current tempo score between the two of you guys, and what is the state of the game. At what phase is the removal valuable for tempo? That may outweigh the one or two card advantage that you had in order to remove those threats. Which kind of segues into what is the difference between card advantage and tempo. And that brings us to last beginner's guide episode. Tempo was going to ask you who is controlling the pace of the game. Card advantage is going to ask who is getting more value from their resources in this game. And sometimes those two things can disagree. Imagine your opponent plays a massive threat and you spend two cards getting rid of it. From a pure card advantage perspective, you might have traded cards 2-for-1 against you. Not ideal. But what if that character was going to attack you every turn and completely take over the game? Removing it may have given you back control of the game and you sacrificed some card advantage, but you gained tempo. And the opposite can happen too. You spend your entire turn drawing cards, generating value. Fantastic. You gained card advantage. Meanwhile, your opponent builds a massive board and starts beating you into the ground. You've got 9 cards in your hand and you're still about to lose. Congratulations on all the cards you drew. Great. You get a cookie. So neither concept exists by itself, and good players are always balancing tempo needs versus card advantage needs. So how do you practice card advantage? So here's something I want you to try during your next few games. At the end of every turn, look at 3 things: hand, board, and life. Don't worry about complicating everything and doing hard math. Just look at them. How many cards do I have? I may have developed on the board. How much life do I have left? Then look at your opponent and ask yourself, where is the advantage? Maybe you're ahead on board. They're ahead in hand. Maybe you're at 1 life and they're at 4 because they're playing yellow. Please change Borsalino. But they're almost completely out of cards. Then start paying attention to your exchanges. When you counterattack, ask, was saving this worth the card? When you use removal, was removing this worth what I spent? When your leader gets attacked, do I actually need to counter for this? You won't always make the right decisions, and that's okay. The important part is you're starting to ask the questions, and because of that, it's how you're going to stop simply playing cards, start understanding why you're playing them. So, if you remember nothing else from this lesson, remember this. Card advantage does not mean having more cards in your hand. It's about getting more value from your resources than your opponent gets from their resources. Hand is a resource, your board is a resource, your life is a resource. And sometimes you should spend those resources to gain tempo. The skill is learning when the exchange is actually worth it. Last time, we learned how to recognize tempo. Today, we learned card advantage. And next, we're going to combine these ideas and start talking about something every One Piece player needs to understand. Resource management. Because your cards aren't the only resources you're managing. We're finally going to bring Dawn into the picture and bring it into the equation of everything that makes a great One Piece card game player. So, if this video helped you understand the game a little better, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps a ton for the channel, and it's completely free to do. And let me know in the comments what part of One Piece do you actually understand better because of this. And until next time, peace and love, Nakama.
Thanks for riding with the vibe. Cozy games every time. Pulling leaders, making plays on the line. Sailing